Aloha aina, ano ai, velina kako. Welcome to Free Hawaii News, brought to you by the Koani Foundation, presenting Hawaiian perspectives on a broad range of topics and issues affecting the Hawaiian Islands, the Pacific, and the world. Your hosts for Free Hawaii News are Leon Kaulahau Siu, musician, composer, diplomat, and political analyst, and Hinaleimoana Wong, Kumu filmmaker, cultural and Hawaiian language preservationist, and community leader. And now, Free Hawaii News.
Ano ai me ke aloha ia kākoa pauloa e ko Hawaii nei pai aina puni. Mahalo ia oko ke kipa mai o wau no o Kumuhina.
And my name is Leon Kaulahau Siu, and we welcome you to this episode of Free Hawaii News. The U.S. presidency of Donald Trump continues to be marked by controversies and upheavals. The deliberate shutdown of significant portions of the U.S. federal government, uncertainty regarding the economy, has triggered large public protests. People are panicking and scrambling to find ways to avoid or adapt to these federal budget cuts. Some people are realizing that this also is a wake-up call on how we need to prepare for an independent Hawaii. To discuss this and ramifications of a future free Hawaii, we have with us in studio Poka Lainui. Poka Lainui is an attorney and a long-time Hawaiian rights advocate and activist. He is the president of the Institute for the Advancement of Hawaiian Affairs, and in the past he has been the organizer and chairman of the Pacific Asia Council of Indigenous Peoples, a vice president and spokesperson of the World Council of Indigenous Peoples before the United Nations, and the convener and chairman of the Hawaii National Transitional Authority, among other accomplishments. He was also the defense attorney for a high-profile case in 1978 in which he won using the issue of Hawaiian nationality as a defense. This is a really controversial issue, and we really became aware of the fact that how dependent we believe we are in Hawaii on the issues of jobs and things like that, and that we're dependent on the federal government. So what's your take on that?
The idea of dependency is false. We are colonized so badly that it seems that we just adopt the American colonization. We believe ourselves being American citizens, and so we have lost our way. We are not really dependent on the United States. If you look at Hawaii as an independent nation, we would be far better off than how the United States treat the Hawaiians today. And when I say Hawaiians, I'm not only talking about the Koko Hawaii, the blood Hawaii, but of the Hawaiian people who see themselves as citizens of the Hawaiian nations. So we would be, as I say, far more independent had the United States simply leave us, go back home. All we need to do is say aloha, and that your Constitution has no continuing constraints over us. It's a mental thing.
Right.
And all we need to say is we are a Hawaiian nation, and it's just a small slip in the conversion from our dependence to an independent Hawaii. That's all it takes.
Yeah. So you see this as an opportunity actually to bring that, to make us more aware of that, because like I said, there's a knee-jerk reaction by most people saying, oh, we need the federal government. But now maybe we need this wake up so that we can start to think in terms of, do we really need them?
Yeah, we need to switch off. Donald Trump said that many countries are calling him to kiss his okole and to try to kowtow to Donald Trump. We need to start refocusing on that and say, no, all we need to do is decouple from the United States. You know, it's like the hokulea being tied to a huge American warship, and they dragging us all over the world as they like. All we need to do is decouple from that, be an independent nation. We have the resources, we have the land, we have the economy, we have the people. All we need is a conscious change.
Yes, yes, very good. Now, as I said, but we still have to bring the nation along as far as people's consciousness and all that. How do you see us doing that?
I think the current presidency will continue to rattle us and force us to ask these questions. What if, what if, what if? But if they start changing the perception and say, why not? An independent nation being able to live on its own, we can draw relationships with other, especially Pacific Island nations, and build an ocean of peace here in Hawaii. We are constantly under a mentality of being threatened by Russia, by China, by Japan, by other nations. The only nation that is threatening us is the United States of America. And so we need to refocus how Hawaii can be an independent nation, how we can survive economically, politically, socially, just be ourselves. And we're very close to that. All we need to do is slip off and recognize we have an entity which is almost there. It's called the state of Hawaii.
Yes, correct.
Just get rid of the state of and just call it Hawaii. We are Hawaii, and we can control our own waters, our own lands. We can even control our national security. How do you control national security? Do we have bombs? Do we have nuclear weapons? Do we have major ships that can threaten other countries? No, and we don't need it. Make the switch off. Instead of being a defensive or an aggressive nation, we would be a defensive nation based on aloha. Reconfigure the whole shebang.
Yes.
And invite other people to come in and partner with us in a concept of an aloha security system.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and as we've discussed before, there is already that in place as far as in the other Pacific Islands, you know. They're basically all neutral, and they don't have an offensive military, and they are right now considering, and I think in November they will be adopting a whole policy on ocean of peace that was proposed by Fiji last year. And so this is where, as you're saying, we need to be. We need to be part of that, rather than part of the war games that are being played.
They're already waiting out there.
Yes.
These are Pacific Islanders, Polynesians, Melanesians, Micronesians. Pacific Island people, essentially of the same mentality. Let's work with one another in peace. We won't go out and threaten any other country, and we will simply base our defense on kokua, on aloha, on helping one another. When Fiji or Guam or any other place in the Pacific get smashed by the weather, then our national security system, which is essentially, who are those folks? Weekend warriors, thanks, Cole. The National Guard can go out and give kokua to these other places. That's what the Hawaii people are.
And that is actually what's going on in the Pacific right now. They kokua each other.
Yeah.
You know, in these times of troubles. I was recently at a conference in American Samoa, and this is exactly. It's really a family. They work together. They pray together. They converse on issues together. So and Hawaii is obviously missing in that equation, and I can tell you we're sorely missed. That is, they look and see, well, there's this big hole in the North Pacific that they would like to have joined them again. It's a bit awkward as far as how we get back in there, but it's something that we do need to do. Going back to the issue of taking care of ourselves, like you mentioned, we do already, just look around us. You know, when people say, where's the Hawaiian kingdom or where's the Hawaiian nation? I say, look around you. This is it. It's just got a different title on it right now. And it's under different management. So I tell people who say, do you really think we can do this? I said, just think of Hawaii as you see it now under new management and with new priorities. The priority is take care of the people, take care of our ocean, take care of our environment. So, so what is, I think, lacking right now is the fact that we don't have the confidence that we can do it. And that comes from the long period of colonialism.
Right.
So building that confidence, how would you suggest?
I call it the fear of freedom. And one way of doing that is through education. Letting people know that we had been an independent nation. Not merely independent, but we were in the forefront of education for Hawaii. We were in the forefront of health for Hawaii. We were in the forefront of supporting our own systems. And we need to start remembering those times. It's like the elephant oftentimes we see in a circus. And he's stuck in the circus. He's going to build a circus tent. He's going to remove that after the circus is done. But he has no consciousness that he was once an independent person, an independent elephant. And they had a very difficult time to corral him, to take his consciousness from him and make him a stooge for the circus. The Hawaiian elephant needs to remember when we were a free and independent people. And we took no back step to any other country. We were highly regarded and treated among equals.
Yes.
You know? Had there been a United Nations at that time, we would have been one of the first members of the United Nations.
And an instigator for it.
That's right,
Yes.
because we were a member of the Universal Postal Union and others. So Hawaii needs to begin to redream who we can be,
Yes.
who we were, you know, and then look at the possibilities for the future. Economically, we can support ourselves. We have one of the largest masses of territory in Hawaii. The whole archipelagic line, the Hawaiian chain, and then 200 miles beyond that from either side is all of Hawaii's territories. It's a massive area that should be under the law of the sea treaties, part of the Hawaiian nation. The slippage between the state of Hawaii and the Hawaiian nation is very small. What does it take? It takes our consciousness to say the American Constitution does not govern us. The federal institutions does not govern us. We need to shift it over to the state and make the state become the nation of Hawaii. Very simple.
Here we are, Leon. We have arrived at this portion of the show. It is among one of my favorite portions because
Likewise.
we get to share about the Pacific Way and we get to speak to our audience, wherever they may be, about Hawaii not necessarily being oriented as we commonly are to and with that gravitational force just forcing us to be within the framework of the American sphere. But our rightful centering is as this body of islands and a people here in the Pacific. So in the Pacific Way, we talk about this, and I heard that you went to America Samoa. Am I correct?
I
Tell us about your trip and what can you share with us?
I went to visit American Samoa because I was invited to come and give a presentation to a group of pastors and church leaders. These are denominational leaders and bishops and about the situation in Hawaii, about our situation of wanting our independence back and working to get our independence back. And basically they were saying, how can we help? You know, so this is, so I went to talk with them because they had already said, we want to help. and just let us know what we can do. Basically, they said, we're here for you. We're part of the family. You're part of our family, and we want to see what we can do to kokua you. So we are working out a plan, and that's going to be very significant for us because many of the countries in the Pacific are independent nations now. About 12 or 13 of them are now independent nations, and they all belong to the United Nations. And so what they're saying is, what do you think we can do to help you at the United Nations? And so this was the conversation, and this is the ongoing conversation. So we're coming up with a plan. I have a plan to propose, and now I need to sit down with the leaders of those countries, which the church leaders are saying we will help you to facilitate. We will help to facilitate getting that meeting. I have in the past met with a number of the leaders of countries in the Pacific. I've attended the Pacific Islands Forum, Pacific Leaders, the Polynesian Leaders Group, Melanesian Spearhead Group, and all that. But this is really different because it's really the grassroots saying, we want to welcome back our long lost ohana into the fold, and this is how we can help.
I've been to Tuvalu, I've been to Rarotonga, Tiu, I've been to Tahiti, Maupiti, and several other islands in that region. Aotearoa, our Polynesian people and our Pacific way, the closest that Hawaii gets to it is when I'm amongst my Ni'ihau family. So I have very fond memories, but I also have very distinct feelings and emotions about it. So I get excited when I hear that other, Hawaiians that I know get to touch base with this. And I wish that everybody else out there in our viewership had a chance to experience what it means to be, whether it be Hawaiian from a Pacific Islander view or a Hawaiian in and amongst other family from the larger Moana Nui.
Aye.
So I appreciate hearing that you went to Samoa, you had a great time. Anything else you want to tell us about the trip?
That it's actually, of course, fostering more trips to the Pacific. And so I am planning on another trip fairly soon to follow up on this one. But it's also going to have quite a bit of impact in not only at the UN, but among other indigenous peoples at the UN with whom the Pacific Islands have very special relations. The Caribbean, for instance, and the islands in the Indian Ocean. So Pacific Islanders, have quite a broad reach as far as where they've been. And Hawaii, of course, was very much in the thick of things back in the 19th century. So now it's the other islands that are out there, but here we are ready to join them and be part of that, not only the Pacific family, but being a part of the influence into the global community as well.
Leaning into the Pacific way, grounding ourselves, rooting ourselves to that which keeps us a Pacific Island people. That is what will ensure our longevity. It ensures our emotional, mental, and spiritual health. And it ensures that our place, especially for Kanaka, here in our own home, it ensures that our culture and our language, as well as our history, has a future here.
Yes.
Without us recognizing that we are rightfully Pacific people, our future is bleak because the American way of life is already one of the primary vices of our undoing. It serves to erode at every element that's supposed to make us Hawaiian. And being Hawaiian and being Pacific Islander requires us to think from the level of the collective. It requires us to think of others. It requires us to have aloha, to be thoughtful, to be kind. Even in our politics, it requires us to be diplomatic, even when we don't agree politically.
Yes.
And even when we don't agree on anything.
Yes.
There's a level of diplomacy that's required it's learned when we are able to speak our language, especially if one is not already conscious about it. But it's key.
Yes.
So
very much.
We are happy that we get to speak about this. I'm waiting for one of your next trips so that I can join you and jump in your bag.
Yes, let's do that.
You're watching Free Hawaii News, giving you the Kanaka perspective on issues in Hawaii.
As a result of the COVID pandemic and Lahaina fires, tourism in Hawaii has been forever changed. A growing number of Hawaii residents have been suggesting a different kind of tourism, one that teaches visitors about Hawaii, its culture, and how Hawaiians view the world, and about Hawaii's limited natural resources. Those who run the tourist and visitor industry in Hawaii have been looking at how other island destinations within Oceania are marketing and delivering their own tourist experience. Recently, the British Broadcasting Corporation published a piece online entitled "The Paradise Islands That Don't Want to Be Hawaii." Those islands, the Cook Islands, are part of Polynesia, and they have a model of tourism that is strikingly different from what we have had here in Hawaii. The Cook Islands are proving that sustainable tourism is both possible and essential. One of those here in Hawaii who has been an advocate for alternate models of tourism is Ramsey Tom. He is the director of the Pacific Island Leadership Institute at Hawaii Pacific University, and he is a respected cultural practitioner and instructor of several Native Hawaiian practices, Ho'oponopono and Lua, among others. Ramsey Tom is a sought-after cultural resource keynote speaker, lecturer, trainer, and facilitator. He has been especially effective working with Hawaii's travel, leisure, and retail industry, where he has advocated for integration of place-based and culture-based values in Hawaiian visitors industry. Aloha, Ramsey.
Aloha, Leon.
What are some of the differences in tourism between Hawaii and the Cook Islands?
From what I experienced personally in dealing with the visitor experience or tourism in the Cook Islands is one, the physical experience. Unlike Hawaii, it's not engaged in a mass tourism model, large buildings, vertical, much more horizontal, much more community oriented. I think the community is much more engaged. You don't feel an industry as we do here in Hawaii. But I think for me, the significant difference is when we speak about the Cook Islands, we're speaking about a national experience. It's a national economic model. Whereas Hawaii, we are a state within the United States. So consequently, we don't have the same kind of promotion and support across the archipelago. Although we do have HVCB and HDA working for the state of Hawaii. But similarly, you have New Zealand and countries that are managing their visitor industries or tourism. And I think that's a significant difference between the Cook Islands as a national entity versus the state of Hawaii promoting the tourism experience in the islands.
Is there a difference between tourists and visitors?
I've long been an advocate of acknowledging the difference between tourists and visitors. Significantly, I think tourists represent an experience of standing behind a stanchion or looking at things through a bus window or at a distance, not engaging as a visitor would. The concept of a visitor is someone that is coming to engage, participate, develop relationships. Maybe this is an oversimplification, but I would suggest that tourism is a transactional experience, while the visitor experience is perhaps more relational. That may be a broad distinction, but I think that begins to speak to it. I think if we all look back at our history with tourism, going back to the early 30s and before that, people came here, and before the hotels were established, the visitor stayed for longer than a week or until the next ship came by. And they didn't have a hotel or somewhere to stay, so they actually stayed with residents in homes with families, therefore creating a visitor experience and actually developing relationships.
Many tourists say visiting the Cook Islands is like stepping back in time, like Hawaii of the 1960s, uncrowded, laid back, and refreshingly authentic. What would it take to rekindle that kind of visitor experience in Hawaii in 2025?
When I was there last in the Cook Islands, I had the same feeling and thought. It was very reminiscent of growing up in Kailua here on Oahu, visiting my grandmother and actually driving out to what we then called the country. So it felt very country-esque, that whole rural experience. Whereas here in Hawaii, at least on Oahu, that's not necessarily true. How we get there, I think, is one, I'm not sure we can physically do that because we've really committed ourselves, and I don't have to prove it. We can just look around and see it, to growing concrete, at least in the urban experience. So Hawaii has become, or at least Oahu has become much more of an urban visitor experience with these spotlights of nature in the distance. Fortunately, on neighbor islands, we haven't completely lost that. But if we're not careful, we could, especially when we start looking at the delivery of services rather than the preservation of the place. In the Cook Islands, I think that rural experience, thus the sense of authenticity, is much clearer because you don't have the kind of build out that we have here. And whatever is built out still has that sense of place. You're not in Kansas, you're not in Los Angeles, you're not looking at architecture or structure that is European or continental to the extent that we see here.
What is the best way to shift the expectations of those wanting to vacation here in Hawaii?
I think the idea of shifting the experience starts with what we think of ourselves and who is actually driving that marketing. The resident really has very little to say about how Hawaii is marketed, how people learn about us, or what they know about us, which is going to come through social media. We have a greater opportunity through social media, Instagram and things like that, for the resident to actually put out things that they want others to know about them. But so does the commercial industry, right? So marketers and hotels, they can also use these same platforms. So I think for there to be a shift, we have to decide who's actually telling the message or who's sending the message. I don't think there's anything stopping us from allowing the resident to be the ones marketing. I mean, the whole 200 rule, right? You and I know 200 people each. They know 200 people. Well, what if we were the ones doing the inviting rather than a marketing team in Chicago or Boston or wherever we're sending our marketing dollars? Granted, we've had 10 million people come in the last several years, and we consider that a success. But are they the right people? And do they want to come and see us? Well, if we have 1.5 million people in Hawaii, and let's just say 500,000 of us all became the inviters, we're inviting all of our friends to come to Hawaii, then I think we have a different visitor coming, and then we can begin to shift the experience.
Only residents can own land in the Cook Islands, which prevents large corporations from coming in. Would that be possible to do in Hawaii, or is it just too late?
If the host and the resident had more say in it, was actually participating in partnership, not just as service providers, employees, but actually true partners, I think we could begin to see some changes, some shifts. But the whole notion of mass tourism versus community tourism. That's a shift in the business model. I don't think it's too late, but clearly it's hard to go back to that environment you talked about earlier, where we're looking at what Hawaii was like in the 60s. In some of our neighbor island communities, we can still do that. But in Honolulu and an urban situation, unless we remove that urban experience, we have more of the same. So really it comes down to, what do we see as a priority? I'm not sure it's a values conflict. I think it's a priorities conflict. And if those priorities are driven by a marketing and a revenue model that extracts revenue from the place and only leaves it back in terms of payment to communities, I don't know that we'll see that happen anytime soon, because it takes a major investment, obviously, to be able to do that. With a community buy-in and partnership and ownership, I think you have a greater chance of the community investing in something that they're going to benefit directly from. So I think those are the kinds of shifts that need to be made in order for us to see something like that.
Tourism is a key industry in the Cook Islands, yet residents have ensured that sustainability is one of their core values. How difficult would it be to do that here in Hawaii?
I think at large, the Cook Islands, as well as other Pacific Island nations and communities, have learned that tourism is a viable economic opportunity. But I think the difference between there and Hawaii goes back to my earlier observation that Hawaii is still considered a state in the United States, and any decisions are being made by the partners that are not from Hawaii, but from the continent and or international partners, right, or investors. In the Pacific Islands and the Cook Islands, you have leadership that is still traditional, to the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, I can't buy land there, I'm not a resident there, but you have traditional leaders who themselves still hold title to much of that land. So I think that's a significant difference, because they are making decisions. The community has a direct input or say with their traditional leaders, which we don't have here.
Residents obviously play a significant role in what tourism is like in the Cook Islands. How could Hawaii's residents do that here?
I think I mentioned earlier, what would happen if we shifted who was actually doing the inviting, who was actually honored and recognized as a host. So imagine, Leon, someone comes to Hawaii and every place they go, they say, who is your host here? And your name pops up. And in doing so, you then are credited with that. And we're recognized. What happens then is the visitor is now having a relationship, and the person who's hosting them is having some benefit. Right now, that doesn't happen. The benefits are really going back to the industry, whether it's a hotel, a truck, a bus company, or an airline. Their function is to get people here, give them the experience, and make money from that. Their function isn't to pass that on to the community. The community is getting paid or getting its benefit from their labor, not from anything. There's really not a profit to any of that. So the profit-driven component is very different than, I think, a community-based tourism experience where that's shared across the community. So until that happens, then the model is still extractive. And I think some of our new visitor industry leaders are calling that out, that the old model or the prevailing model is still based on an extractive model. And in Hawaii, that's going to continue until it stays in Hawaii.
One of the most important kuleana or responsibility that we as Hawaiians have is to malama, or care for our iwi kupuna, the buried bones of our ancestors. As Hawaiians, it is essential to our connection to land and to the place that we come from and to who we are. That's why a recent court ruling last March, which says the state of Hawaii mishandled its archaeological permitting process and failed to protect iwi kupuna at a Maui development site, is being hailed as a victory by Maui Hawaiian activists as long overdue. The development site that is the basis of the court ruling on Maui is the Grand Wailea Resort and Spa, a luxury 40-acre beachfront resort built in 1991 and is now planning an expansion. Known iwi kupuna burials are in the area where the hotel expansion construction is planned. The recent court ruling states the Hawaii Board of Land and Natural Resources, or BLNR, breached its duty to preserve and protect traditional and customary Native Hawaiian rights, to protect iwi kupuna at this planned construction site. Hawaiian protectors of those remains say the decision finally recognizes injustices Hawaiians have been facing for decades. One of the main Maui-based organizations that has been fighting to protect iwi kupuna is Malama Kakanilua. Claire Apana, a native of Wailuku, Maui, and head of Malama Kakanilua, is a Hawaiian cultural practitioner who has been deeply involved with cultural preservation issues throughout Maui. As a descendant of sand dune burials on Maui, she has been standing up against developers in court to stop desecration of Hawaiian burial grounds.
This intervention that we are interveners in the expansion of the Grand Wailea is Malama Kakanilua, Pele Defense Fund, and Ho'oponopono o Makena, 3 grassroots Kanaka Maoli organizations. You know, we're not big organizations, but they have kept us in this case for over 5 years. And during those 5 years, Blackstone, who owns the hotel, has had 17 permits that are special permits that the planning director signs off on. And they've done 17 of these permits to essentially do some of their expansion and do other work that they wanted to do during the time that we're doing the intervention. So they blame us for keeping it going, but actually I think they found a way to do the work and get around the fact that there's iwi kupuna all over the grounds there, because it is a burial ground. It is the most concentrated burial ground in all of South Maui, and definitely the most concentrated burial ground of any resort in South Maui. And there's so many problems that have come up with the resort, including environmental ones, where they polluted the bay. The bay has to be closed because of bacteria. You know, where they take so much water. They are the largest commercial water user in Maui. They at one time used like 1 million gallons a day for this hotel that's like 30 acres. In Oahu, that would mean that they could have 120,000 gallons a day. That's how much it would be. But in Maui, use what you like, because nobody wants to stop a resort.
So it's not just iwi kupuna issues, but it's also environmental violations that have been going on. Would that characterize what is going on there?
I feel like our iwi kupuna are trying to protect this area, because this was once a really abundant fishing area. It's called Kahamanini, right? And so all of our families who have grown up on Maui have gone down there and camped for the weekend while, you know, the people were fishing, and we'd just be on the beach having fun, camping, and we've all done that. So it's so common, but not now, because now there's hotels there, there's cabanas, and there's umbrellas, and that's not for us. No more even parking space for us, you know? So, but our iwi kupuna are there, and we have every right to take care of them and see that the desecration stops. Stop planning infrastructure on top of known burial grounds. That is the biggest message of this Grand Wailea expansion. There's one wing they're planning to put right in the burial preserve, right like this, here. And when they started, it was in the burial preserve. So that's how much they care to take care of our ancestors. If our kupuna are in the ground, whose land is that? Does that belong to Blackstone? Where they were buried, you know, in 600 or 1200? Is that belong to Blackstone? I don't think so. And our court case shows that we, Kanaka Maoli, and in specific Malama Kakanilua, because we were part of this legal thing, is that we have an interest in our iwi kupuna. The developer does not. This is not like, oh, the developer bought this land and so he can do whatever he wants. Yeah, we can't, you know, it's too bad, but we can't stop it. No, no, no. We have rights with our iwi kupuna. I would hope that our continued efforts to protect our iwi kupuna and our right to protect them and our tradition of honoring our ancestors will continue and grow.
I would agree with you that having a connection and having a relationship with this land is essential. So whether people are our own Kanaka, as
Right.
well as others whom now live and occupy our places and spaces, a connection is important, and respecting the relationship that we as Kanaka have with the land is key.
Hawaii has had a presence at the United Nations for over 50 years. Hawaiian patriots such as Kawaipuna Brejin, Pokalai Nui, Kekula Crawford, Kekuni Blaisdell, Bumpy Kanahele, Mili Lani Trask, and more were initially prominent leaders in advocating for Native or Indigenous rights. But with the Kawani Foundation, over the past 20 years or so, our focus has been national sovereignty and independence. Officially, there are only 17 territories left on the UN's list of non-self-governing territories. That's down from the list of about 100 that they started with in 1946. About 80 members of the United Nations today came from the original list of countries to be decolonized. So, the UN's decolonization effort, put into motion in 1946, has been very successful. Except for the 17 on the list of non-self-governing territories, the UN has abandoned its decolonization mandate, leaving all other peoples and nations from accessing a peaceful path to decolonization. The choice is now subjugation or war. Besides its abandonment of its mandate for decolonization, there are many other much more pressing issues: wars, other violent conflicts, population displacement, economics, poverty, health crisis, development, climate change, and so forth, that take precedence at the UN. Nevertheless, we persist in telling our story and making friends at the international level, knowing that the pursuit of freedom for Hawaii cannot be abandoned because others are distracted by more pressing issues. It is our kuleana, no matter what the climate, to stand for pono. We are not only advocating for Hawaii, we have been working on the issue of decolonization with others such as Alaska, the Lakota, and other Native American nations, the First Nations of what is now known as Canada, and the Mapuche of Chile and Argentina, and others in Latin America, Jammu and Kashmir and others in Asia, and of course in the Pacific, Rapa Nui, West Papua, Maluku, Maohi Nui, now known as French Polynesia, Kanaki, now known as New Caledonia. All these are captured nations seeking independence from their respective captors, who are members of the United Nations. Although our situation is urgent to us, it is not seen as such by others. Again, wars and other violent conflicts, population displacement, economics, poverty, health crisis, development, climate change, and so forth take precedence over self-determination. So even those who see our problem do not see it as urgent. We are not perceived as being an imminent danger. In fact, we are perceived as having it pretty good compared to most of the rest of the world. From a development standpoint and in comparison to the rest of the world, Hawaii is very well off. So what are we complaining about? When speaking on panels and making interventions at UN bodies like the Human Rights Council, I am often invited to speak alongside the Kashmiri, the Palestinians, the Sahrawi, the Western Sahara, the Arak Asli of West Papua, and so forth. Each of their situations are much more dire than ours, yet we work together to raise the issue of self-determination for all peoples. Despite the lack of interest by the UN in the issue of self-determination and decolonization of all peoples, and despite the dire troubles facing the planet, we persist in informing members of the international community of the special situation of the Hawaiian Islands. Not only do we participate in as many opportunities as possible, we are engaged in discussions of matters that affect all of us in the Pacific and around the globe. We are actively engaged in issues concerning nuclear proliferation, disarmament, demilitarization, ocean of peace, protecting the environment, ocean protection of sea level rise, climate change, economic development, food security, sustainable energy, water resources, cultural rights, and many more. In other words, even though we are not a member of the United Nations, we are engaged as a member of the family of nations.
Next on Free Hawaii News, Kumu Hinaʻs Mana'o.
I would like to speak to you, my fellow Kanaka, as well as others here in Hawaii. Of course, wherever you may be, I'm sure that this all applies if you allow it. But very specifically for those of us Kanaka who live here in the homeland, we see that Hawaii is most definitely embroiled within the same political schematic of American bipartisan politics, Democrat versus Republican in not only views but application of right and wrong. And this particular point hits home even more closely because of the current not only trends, but the current policies that impact people like myself, of which I don't normally make it a point to speak to it on this show. But when it comes to the topic of Mahu, the world of the West will call it transgender. Here in Hawaii, Mahu doesn't necessarily equate automatically to transgender. As I've spoken about in other public forums, LGBTQIA is a rough parallel to what we call Mahu, but it's not an exact equivalent. And that's because Hawaiian identity is not predicated upon one sex or gender. Hawaiian identity is based off of genealogy and land, and that is Mo'oku Auhau and Aina. It's very familiar for anyone who is Hawaiian, who is of the islands, to hear these questions asked. Hey, where are you from? O'oe, no hea mai oe. What island you from? What school did you go to? And of course, more importantly, who's your parents? Who's your grandparents? O'oe, he keiki oe nā wai. And so when we hear these things, oe no hea mai oe, oe keiki oe nā wai, these are the things that not only in Hawaii, but here in the Pacific, we understand that this is the way our identity is presented and also formulated, because we have parents and grandparents, and the places that our parents and grandparents come from make us who we are, as well as our birth families, our parents, our grandparents. There's much to be said also for the birth order that we find ourselves in. And then there's two other things that I do talk about on this show, and they are called kulana and kuleana. These two words help to define everyone in society, whether kane, wahine, or even mahu. When you come from a society that does not know gender in the way that Western society and its construct creates it to be, when we come from a culture that has only one word, and that is oya, the root of which is ia. Oya is our term for he, she, and it. And so what that tells us is that unless it was for something very specifically relegated to kane and or wahine, there was no need to distinguish between the gender of the individual. And that's because we have a different understanding of how gender roles take shape in Hawaiian and Pacific society. So for this portion of Kumu Hina's Mana'o, I get to speak about what I opened up this segment with, and that is bipartisan American politics. In order for me to keep myself out of the fray of, as well as the mire of American politics, I acknowledge and I recognize that Hawaii is still required to be a big part of things. I also acknowledge that we are greatly impacted. However, internally, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, my grounding is as Kanaka. And so when I look at the world and I look at things that affect Hawaii, I don't have to be so emotionally, mentally, and spiritually stressed, because I know that the terms by which the West and Western European American societies treat certain things, I know that I don't have to internally be beholden to it. It's not my compass. It's not what holds true bearing for me. For I know that I am Kanaka. I am the child of Georgette and Henry. I am the grandchild of Mona, John, Edith, and Henry. And I know my families, I know their names, and I know the lands that my families come from. Be it my mother's side, which is the Hawaiian and the Portuguese and the English side, whether it be my father's side, which is the Chinese side. I know who I am. I know my place in my family. And I also know that my kulana, my place or my status and my role in the community affords me certain duty, obligation, and responsibility. My kulana is defined by the kuleana that is assigned to me and how I fulfill it. So when it comes to my self-worth, and when the rest of the world would look at me with eyes of lack of acceptance, eyes of disdain, and even thoughts of violence, I know that I don't have to be mentally, emotionally, and spiritually thrown off the track. I do not have to succumb to that which comes to us here in Hawaii from the outside. And I know that to be strong means to be centered. To be strong means to be balanced, and to be strong means that I cannot and will not allow myself to be so completely consumed by American bipartisan politics that I fail to see the privilege that I have by being me, the person that comes to you each month in this program. And that one little aspect, one element of my life has to do with this word mahu. It's not everything that defines me, and certainly it does not dictate everything in my life. Sometimes it makes it a challenge, and sometimes it simply means that I have to be more creative in terms of how I approach things, because not everyone sees the value of centering along the lines of Kanaka culture. And that might be some of you, my fellow Kanaka, which is completely fine. We are victims of our own colonized and historical journey that we've been on, and we are subject to all of that. So whether we are Kanaka, Kama'aina, or Malihini Haole here in this island of these islands of Hawaii, just know that you too can avoid falling into the trap of the pressures and the stresses of American-based politics. That's my sentiment for you this evening. That is Kumu Hina's Mana'o, and I thank you all for allowing me to share it with you.
Mahalo nui for joining us for this episode of Free Hawaii News. We were glad you could be here, and we want to thank all of our guests for sharing their mana'o with us.
Ano laila, mahalo anui ko kako hui ana, mahalo anui ki kipa ana mai, a mahalo a hiki ko kako hui ho ana I keia manawa ho aku. A hui ho kako, aloha.
We hope you enjoyed this month's episode of Free Hawaii News. Mahalo for watching. There's a new show every month, so this program will air several more times this month. You can view it anytime on Olelo's on-demand site or on YouTube. See you next time. Ahui ho, aloha aina.
Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.